love getting applause when I haven't done anything. We should all go through life that way. I've got 3 stories to start with for you. Story number 1. If you peruse the yearbooks from my elementary school, you'll see pictures of an art teacher named Mrs. Gora. Now, Mrs. Gora always dressed in costume on picture day. Yearbook photos show her dressed as a witch, an alien, and even a Star Wars stormtrooper. In real life, she wore thick lens glasses and bizarre, voluminous outfits, and passed out petrified candy bars as rewards for art well done. She was always saying cryptic things like, "What's the sound of one hand clapping?" But on one subject, she was clear. She taught me to never be afraid to put my vision on paper. "Ordinary stinks. Stand up and be who you are," she said when I drew an unimaginative tree. "Don't be dull. Lift it, kiddo." After I left Mrs. Gora behind and began junior high school, we were encouraged to decorate our protective paper textbook covers. Hearing Mrs. Gora's voice in my head, "Lift it, kiddo," I happily painted my math book cover with bright red and yellow tempera paint. The blobs of color on the brown grocery sack paper swirled around with the help of my paintbrush until they began to look like a field of bold Van Gogh-style flowers. I carried this book to school the next day, and immediately the tongues began to wag. "Are those flowers on his book? Doesn't he know he's a boy?" By 4th period, Carl Breck was elected to approach me. "Boys don't have flowers on their book covers," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Why?" I asked, thinking that Mrs. Gora would have asked the very same question. He paused, stumped. "Just don't," he finished, and then ran away. Determined to challenge the status quo that day, I made my way through 2 more classes before the derisive laughter and name-calling got to be too much. With apologies to the memory of Mrs. Gora, I tore my masterpiece from my math book and threw it into the garbage can. The moral of the story? Flowers can be dangerous. Story number 2. In the Broadway musical Little Shop of Horrors, Seymour finds a small withered plant. You know where I'm going with this. Despite caring for it in every way he knows how, the plant looks like it's going to die. One day Seymour accidentally pricks his finger on a thorn, and the single bud on the plant opens itself up and feasts on the blood from his finger. The plant grows perkier immediately, budding into a flower. In a memorable song called "Feed Me," which I'm not going to be singing for you now, this strange flower unabashedly confesses it needs human blood to grow. Seymour feeds the plant his own blood, but it keeps ordering him to feed me, and Seymour begins committing murder to feed his hungry flower. Eventually it grows so big that the show ends with tendrils from the now giant plant wrapping themselves around the audience members, with multiple flower heads demanding payment in blood. Feed me. The moral of this story: flowers can be dangerous. Story number 3. In 1809, a ragged band of a dozen French troops stopped to rest and eat in the woods outside of Madrid. Using branches cut from an oleander tree, they removed the beautiful pink and red flowers and made skewers to roast meat on. After eating, they began to feel weak and dizzy. Then nausea set in, quickly followed by vomiting. 7 of the 12 men died simply because their food had come into contact with wood from the poisonous oleander. If you even eat honey made by bees that have gathered pollen from oleander flowers, you'll probably die. The moral of this story: yes, once again, flowers can be dangerous. Now, listen, I know a lot of you came here today because you love the flower communion service, and rightly so. It's a tradition of our Unitarian Universalist faith, and here I am ruining it with my stories of bloodthirsty, poisonous, or dangerous flowers. I promise there is a point to all this. So let's back up for a minute and talk about the usual topic for a Flower Communion Sunday: a man named Norbert Capek. And I have a surprise for you. Ladies and gentlemen, through the miracle of modern technology, well, that might be a slight overstatement, I will now take you back in time to Prague, 1923, to a large church sanctuary where Norbert Capek will speak to you about a dilemma he faces. And I have a warning: Norbert Capek may bear some resemblance to me. Ah, you have come, my friends. Thank you. I have a problem that I need your advice on. Here I stand in the hush of my empty church, knowing that in a few hours these seats will be filled with lots of people who call this their spiritual home. Yet there is something missing. Forgive my dour expression. I am 52 years old, and no matter what I do, my face wears my inner feelings on the outside like a child, my wife says. I am glad no one from my congregation is here to see me now, for they are my problem. Now, some of them come from Jewish backgrounds, some Catholic, some Christian, but these different people have all chosen to worship together in this church home, one that is progressive and open. But an open faith has not always been mine. No. I grew up Roman Catholic, but Catholicism was not right for me, so I found the Baptist, and that seemed right. Of course, I was 18 years old, and at 18, a lot of things seem right that don't seem right later on. But there was always a need within me to serve others. So I set out with a stack of Bibles under my arm and an eagerness to spread a message of love and salvation. It worked, too. Now, maybe they felt sorry for a boy with bright eyes and dusty clothes, but at farmhouses and cottages, I found eager ears ready to hear good news as doors opened to me. And along the way, an unexpected door opened in me. The more I traveled, the more I spoke with different people of different faiths, the more questions stirred within me. Later, I found myself in charge of many Baptist churches, but I couldn't stop questioning. And with those questions, the more my idea of faith opened up like a flower blossoming. So I was ordered to stand before the angry members of the Baptist Church Council. One says, "You talk like a heretic." Another says, "You fill your congregation's heads with ideas that make them question everything," as if that's bad. And finally, another one says, "You talk like a Unitarian. Why don't you go join them?" How right he was. He had meant to insult me, but even then I had been a Unitarian. I just didn't know it yet. And now, several years and a great war later, I stand here in the Unitarian church I began, now minister to a congregation of thousands, but unable to figure out how to solve a problem. Tell me, how do you bring together a congregation as diverse as this one? We have thrown out dogma and mindless ritual and stimulated the congregants intellectually, but now there are rumblings that something spiritual is missing. There is need to feed their souls with a binding symbolic ritual like that of the traditional communion service with its bread and wine. Oh, but that will not do. No. This ritual will have to be something new so as to not alienate anyone. It will have to be something that reflects that we have all chosen this inclusive faith. But what to do? Look out the window. Instead of wrestling with this problem in here, I wish I were out there. When the flowers are in bloom on those hills, you've never seen such a glorious sight. But maybe, so simple, but maybe that is my answer. That countryside is something that belongs to all of us, and we belong to it. And so, with some artistic license, that's the story of how the flower communion service is born.